This is The Week on Word, a podcast featuring a roundup of the most interesting, informative, and entertaining interviews from Word Radio. You can listen to WURD Radio anytime, anywhere on wordradio.com. That's WURDradio.com and the Word Radio app. Just give us a play and download it today. In this episode, Dr. Alaysia Black Hackett, former Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor, joined the Midday Break Room with Tiffany Bacon to discuss her book, The Diversity Illusion, and Dr. David Johns, Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition and host of the Teach the Babies podcast, spoke with Dr. James Peterson about the urgent need for more Black male educators in U.S. schools. But first, film critic Tim Gordon joined Wake Up With WURD with Solomon Jones to reflect on the career and cultural impact of actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner.
Joining us now is Tim Gordon. He's publisher for the film Gordon, WETA's Around Town critic, film capo of WAFCA, and host of the big show, Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. Tim, good morning.
Brother, what are we doing here, man? This is new. What is this?
You know, we try to keep up with the times, brother. How you like
early
it?
in the morning?
Yeah.
This is what we do in Philly?
This is what we doing.
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, man. It's always good to see you.
Well, you know, every time you call me, that means something bad has happened in the world.
I'm trying to call you with good stuff, too. I know. I thought about it.
Look, something has gone terribly wrong, which is why it's time for us to talk again.
Lord have mercy. I thought about it yesterday when I texted you. I thought about you saying that. I was like, you know what? He's right. But man, oh man, oh man. I mean, just the life and legacy of Malcolm-Jamal Warner, of course, a guy who we watched literally grow up on the Cosby Show. What are your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things, man. I was, while we were in commercial break, I was on my site and we did something yesterday we probably had never done before, where we actually had myself and another colleague of mine both wrote pieces about Malcolm-Jamal Warner, because in my piece I wrote, he was, we grew up watching him. I mean, we watched him grow up, but to us, he was America's son, man. I mean, it's so funny at the timing of all of this, Solomon. Yesterday, we were working back and forth on a list that we started last week on my show. The top 100 Black shows of all time, TV shows of all time.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not a surprise which show finished number one, right? So as we were in the middle of writing that, this news came down and I was like, wow. It's like, wow, the timing could not have been worse for what we were trying to do. But as it relates to Malcolm-Jamal Warner, man, I'm probably several years older than he is, but that show impacted all of us in a way that, we saw ourselves in that character, a lot of young Black boys. And one of the things I had a couple of observations, man. Mm-hmm. One was everybody sort of knew, if you didn't know, that the Theo Huxtable character that Malcolm-Jamal Warner kind of embodied was based on Bill Cosby's own son, Ennis, who he had tragically lost some years earlier, right? And, he actually even gave the disabilities that his own son had into the character of Theo. And as I wrote yesterday, used that character in a way for us to see not just parenting, but a father-son dynamic that we really weren't accustomed to seeing on television during that time, right? Because we normally would see the father-son dynamic, if we saw it at all, in a comedic way sometimes. And even though Dr. Cosby used it in that way, he gave us a lot of life lessons through that relationship that he had with the Theo Huxtable character, him and Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Mm-hmm. And it was important, that representation was really important. And then not just Malcolm-Jamal Warner on camera, but the life he led off camera, where, since so much of his life was public on a show that was that huge, he really closely guarded his personal life. And I mean, to this day, yesterday when everybody was making these announcements and doing their recollections, people were really kind to not mention his daughter, to mention his wife. They would say his wife and daughter, but we never got names. And even post Malcolm-Jamal Warner, that what he established still stays the same, man.
It's interesting because a lot of people who grow up in that spotlight, the spotlight literally burns them. They don't, they end up as adults in a very different place than they were as children. But he seemed to be able to handle that in a way that allowed him to grow up into adulthood and have a normal life. That's different.
He had good mentors, man. I mean, think about it. Between Felicia Rashad and Dr. Cosby, man, I mean, he had really good mentors, man. And he talked about that often, of the foundation that was established for him. People forget he was 14, 15, 16 years old, man, when he came on that show, man. I mean, he was really, really young. And, along with Lisa Bonet and Keisha Knight Pulliam and all of the other characters that were there, they sort of grew up in this kind of television family, but this makeshift family that they're all connected to one another, right? Yeah. So also you have to credit his mother, Pam, who really did an amazing job with how they raised him. Yeah. And, he grew up, man, to be very artistic, very independent. He was an activist. I mean, in the 54 years that he walked among us, he could be very proud of the contributions that he made. Mm-hmm. Every show wasn't on the level of, say, the Cosby Show, but they didn't really have to be, man. I mean, that was that one chapter, and then he went on and had other chapters. Yeah. I think he was just on a podcast I watched very recently, sort of talking about, his band that he had and some of the things that he was doing. So again, man, I mean, it hits us all in the gut when you see somebody around our age who is that accomplished, man, that leaves us in such a senseless way, man. I mean, who goes on vacation, Solomon, with the idea that you're never coming back? I know. Who does that? Yeah. So that part to me is tragic, and that, my heart went out to his wife and kids and his family who had to get that news and had to endure that. I mean, it can't be easy. Yeah. But they should be proud of the man he was and the man that he became.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, so many child stars flame out, man. They either their family does it to them, or the spotlight does it to them, or they do it to themselves, or they there's so many things. And you're right. It's about mentorship, and it's about leadership and other people who set an example before you of, this is what you do. This is what you don't do that with your money. Don't do that. This is how you conduct yourself. And he was able to do that in such a way that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. It's hard to live your life in a spotlight, especially now, given that there is social media now, where there wasn't when he was a child. He was on a show recently, I think, called The Resident. Talk about that a little bit.
Played an MD on this show, man, and wow, that's another thing. I completely forgot about that. I wasn't a person who watched that particular show. I just knew he was on it, and when you just said that out loud, I'm going, wow. Wonder how they're gonna handle that, man, because they're in the middle of a shooting schedule, and he's not gonna come back to shoot. So, wow. Yeah, man, it sort of reminds me. I mean, not to a much lesser degree of the Chadwick Boseman situation, of how there were plans to move forward, and suddenly an actor is not there. Yeah, and then how do you work around that? I don't think it's to that degree on that show, but it is a loss, man, for the people who had to work with him, who developed those relationships and knew him. So yeah, man, that's I really can't speak, to be perfectly honest, Solomon, because I wasn't really a guy who watched that one particular show or that performance. But I just watched almost everything else he did and was like, wow, this kid, man, he carried himself with such an integrity, which I think speaks to what you said earlier about the mentorship and the leadership that he got earlier in his life, man. That he was able to walk in that level of confidence and be the man that folks sort of, all of the things that were instilled in him, we sort of watched it play out over the course of his life.
What are some of the other things and other performances that stand out for you from Malcolm-Jamal Warner's life and career?
Well, the one that was interesting yesterday was his work on Malcolm and Eddie, right? And I watched an interview yesterday he might have done several years ago where he talked about how tough it was to do that show because him and Eddie Griffin really didn't get along, right? And the guy said, well, how did you guys wind up doing a show when you guys didn't see eye to eye? He said, first of all, we were professionals. He said, secondly, we weren't going to mess up the money, right? We weren't going to let our differences, get in the way. Because remember on that show, they played best friends, right? So he said they would come together. They would talk to each other, look each other in the eye before every taping. He said, and then they would go out and do what they needed to do. And they had the chemistry to do what they needed to do and the professionalism. He said, but off camera, they were just two different people. Eddie had one philosophy, that was kind of rooted in him being a little wilder and crazier. Malcolm, of course, is the consummate professional. You work on a set or in a show for 8 years where you were around Dr. Cosby, you were around Felicia Rashad and all these other professionals. So I sort of got it and understood it, but it is very interesting of Solomon. Think about how the bar for him was set so high when he was young that it was always going to be difficult for him to find projects on television that would measure up to, his beginning. It's just almost impossible, even on projects that he sort of helmed, like read between the lines with him and Tracy Ellis Ross. It was just difficult to find environments on television like the Cosby Show. It's just almost impossible.
So the legacy of the Cosby Show, because, Malcolm-Jamal Warner, of course, talked about how it opened America's eyes to the fact that there was a black middle class, upper middle class, in fact, that this did exist, that no, everybody didn't live on good times and the Jeffersons, no, that wasn't the reality for everybody. But then, of course, the later problems with Bill Cosby sort of changed that legacy for some. How do you think that show will be seen going forward?
Well, let's just call it what it is, man. For 8 years, and I would say for probably the first 4 or 5, it was the #1 show on television. I'm not talking about #1 black show. Yeah, it was a #1 show on television. It was the biggest thing on television, at least for five of those 8 years, right? Yeah. And when I wrote the line that he was America's son, he really was, because that show was getting 30, 40 million people a week watching the Cosby Show. And it wasn't just because they were these, this power couple, one being an attorney and one being a doctor, but it was all of the life lessons that were infused into that show, the different situations of us watching a black man loving a black woman, a black man and a black woman raising their kids, the life lessons that we're watching these kids go through because their lives weren't perfect, right? Right. And, it's so funny when you talk about Malcolm-Jamal Warner. The first thing I thought about yesterday when I got the news was the episode that they had. I think it was early in the run. It might have been like the pilot or the second episode when when Cliff and Theo sat in his bedroom, and he was telling them, he was like, y'all are professional. I just want to be a regular guy. I don't know why y'all putting all these expectations on me. And he goes through this impassioned speech, and you hear the audience clapping, and Cosby comes back and goes, That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. And I thought that perfectly established the foundation of how this show was going to be different. That you're lazy, you're afraid to try. We're gonna put pressure on you. We're going to hold you to a certain standard, and you're gonna work hard. And you saw it play out over the course of those 8 years. And along with all of the other humorous moments, that moment to me sort of spoke about fatherhood. It talked about legacy. There's so much to unpack from watching that show. So to me, the legacy is that if you get caught up in who Bill Cosby is, you miss the life lessons of a really good show. Because even if I watch it, I know sometimes I catch grief in my house when I put it on and watch it. So I got to watch it in the office. But it is such a really good show. And Solomon, let's call it what it is, man. I understand that things evolve and things change over time, but there's certain things that are going to be standards in the 80s. The Cosby Show was great. Michael Jackson's Thriller is simply the biggest album I've ever seen, and nothing will ever surpass Thriller. So it is what it is, man. The Cosby Show, I think, has a very rich legacy. And if you take out the troubles of the show's creator and founder, it's still an awfully really good show. It really is. Yeah,
it absolutely is. That's film critic Tim Gordon. Where can we find you, Tim?
Man, you can find me on thefilmgordon.com. And also a quick plug before I get out of here.
Absolutely.
Washington Black is going to be debuting tomorrow night on Hulu. I got a chance to see the first 4 of the, I think, 8 episodes. Solomon, it is a different story about enslaved people. This one is filled with hope. This one is, it's a very different story. That's all I'll say. I highly recommend it. Read my review. I watched it yesterday and got a review up as quick as I could since it's going to drop tomorrow.
Okay.
It's really good, man. It's really, really good.
All right, we got to check it out. That's Tim Gordon. He's publisher for The Film Gordon, WETA's Around Town critic, film capo of WAFCA, and host of The Big Show, Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. You can check him out at thefilmgordon.com.
You're listening to The Week on Word.
Good morning. It's Solomon Jones, host of the hottest morning show on radio, Wake Up With WURD. Listen weekdays from 7 to 10 a.m. for laughter, for fun, for politics, for family, for more than you can imagine. Check it out every day, Monday through Friday. Wake Up With WURD on 96.1 FM, 900 AM, WURD.
This is the Week on Word podcast, highlighting the top conversations on Word Radio. Make sure you look for and follow WURD Radio on social media. Up next, Dr. Alaysia Black Hackett, former Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at the United States Department of Labor, joins the Midday Break Room with Tiffany Bacon. I want to welcome our next guest, a very accomplished woman who also has a book out, which we will talk about in just a minute. She is the former Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at the Department of Labor under the Biden administration, and she has a new work for us to read. It's called The Diversity Illusion, and I'll give you the subtitle in just a minute, but I want to welcome to the program Dr. Alaysia Black Hackett. Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here with you.
I appreciate your presence, and I appreciate your work. First and foremost, tell us all that you did as the Diversity and Equity Officer during the Biden administration.
Absolutely. So I've been doing diversity, equity, and justice work for over 2 decades now, and had the opportunity to work with President Biden and the Biden-Harris administration as the inaugural Chief Diversity and Equity Officer for the U.S. Department of Labor, meaning I was responsible for implementing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility across all workforce in the United States. And so I was able to work not only with the labor force, but also health and human services. We work with environmental justice. I mean, all of it is inclusive of equity. So I was privileged and had an honor of working with the Biden administration, and I was appointed by President Biden.
I love that. And thank you for your work in that. The subtitle of your book, The Diversity Illusion, subtitle, Why the Obsession with Looking Diverse is Failing and What They Don't Want You to Know. Tell us about this, please.
Absolutely. So again, through the years of doing this work, I've seen the highs, the lows, the ups and downs. I often speak about the various iteration of this work. It's gone from being civil rights to urban affairs to multicultural affairs to intercultural affairs, diversity. So we have name changes, but this work continues. However, in doing this, I realized that especially after the murders of George Floyd in 2020, a lot of corporations, businesses, organizations wanted to jump on the bandwagon of we're doing DEIA. You know, everybody wanted to say Black Lives Matter. And what happened was it inundated just kind of media because everybody wanted to put their diversity statement on their websites. Everybody wanted to hire a chief diversity officer and look like they were actually making some shifts and changes or evolving. But the truth of the matter is when you really dig into it and do this work more than just surface level, you find out that it's not what it looks like. And if the power structure doesn't change, if the companies did not provide the necessary resources for that chief diversity officer to be successful, then it's just an illusion. And it's given this ideology that, oh, we've evolved, we've changed. But just like we see this current administration has a all-out war against the work of equity, it's easily rolled back in some situations, and it's optical because a lot of what was happening was performative. And so maybe there is a listener who's saying, well, DEIA doesn't matter to me because I'm not trying to be hired. I hope in this discussion to help with that narrative because it absolutely impacts everybody who lives in the United States of America, because most people fall under the demographic of one of the categories in DEIA. So that's what my book initially is about, is really like exposing this and talking about the programs that we did, not just hiring. It wasn't just about hire, as well as taking away this myth that DEIA equals Black communities or Black hire. It is literally any population that's considered a marginalized group.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we're seeing so much of that come out now, how people just automatically assume DEI is Black, point blank, period, Black or brown. Black specifically. And then they find out all of the other folks that are included in DEI. Let's talk about just your reaction, because many of us have a constant sense of, are we serious? And it's just going to keep going downhill like this, downhill and quickly. What is your take on it and your response, someone who was on the inside of the bubble for a while? How are you viewing what's happening, and where do you see on it going in your expert opinion?
Yes. So it is serious. I often say to folks that I talk to in my family is, I'm not going to be fearful. However, I'm very cautious about what's going on. It is something worth to consider, look at, and prepare for. So it is serious. However, I think it's important, and this is why I've been traveling across the world and this country talking about this, because so many people have no idea what DEIA is and what it is not. And I believe that is why it was an attack, because it was this ideology that is not merit-based for, admission to a college or a university, or it's not about a person's qualifications. And so you're taken away from one group to give to another. And that's not what equity work is. It literally is leveling this playing field, balancing things out from how the systems were created in our country, which were created exclusively. It was not created equally for everyone. right? But because this country is so diverse, we have to be intentional about this balancing act to ensure that we're inclusive of everyone. So DEIA includes people with disability. That's what the A is, accessibility, those who need accommodations. Something as simple as, I want to be hired in a job, but I have a vision issue. I have a vision challenge. And so I need a software program on my laptop that actually reads to me the text. So that's accommodation. That is DEIA programming, as well as veterans, youth. We had youth programs, those who were justice involved or formerly incarcerated. All of that is inclusive of DEIA. So when I see this intentional rollback of the initiatives, some of those things were performative. And the reason why, again, that is so easily, rolling back is because it wasn't baked into the DNA of our country, of the corporations or organizations. It was just kind of layered on top like frosting on a cake. So if I don't like frosting and you like frosting too, you can say, take this to frosting off. But we want it to be baked in like the butter, like the flour, milk, eggs. Once you mix that in the cake, you can't separate it. And that's what it needs to happen. So in all of that, yes, it's a concern. I think we're dealing with an uphill battle, but I know for sure, like I said, the iterations of what this has been called has changed through the course of the last 2 decades that I've been doing the work. Equity work is resilient. Will not stop. It cannot stop. Why? Because our country is so diverse. It becomes more diverse. We're not just urban areas, right? But we have rural Americans who are not typically people of color. But during COVID-19, when our students, our children had to do their classwork at home, right? A lot of people didn't have internet access in rural America. So President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law was a equity initiative, a DEIA initiative to ensure that that marginalized community of rural America had access to internet. So we have to keep the fight going. And I believe part of that is clarifying the narrative, having everyone understand what it is and what it isn't, which is why I wrote this book. I was like, I'm one person and I'm not the only person doing this work, but if I can make it scale, people can read it and have these important conversations.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you did, because it's important to lay it out step by step and make it very clear and very plain. But what do you think is driving some people's intended ignorance? Sometimes I see ignorance as like, no, I really just didn't know. I was never exposed to it. And then there's folks who've been exposed to it, but still choose the other narrative. What drives that? And whether it's in the Black community or outside of the Black community?
Very good question. Very good question. So I do think a lot of what happens is intentional, as far as I don't want to know, because again, a lot of times the people who are speaking the loudest are the ones most heard, and they're typically wrong. So you hear a lot of what's going on. I know right after the inauguration of our current administration, I was inundated with like emails and text messages from various media sources. And honestly, after a while, I kept saying, I'm not doing your interviews. We need to have a discovery conversation so that we can provide, or I can provide you with language, because they are asking questions or they continue to promote a narrative that is not accurate. So a lot of people do not want to, it's called self-learning. You have to take the responsibility of yourself to educate yourself and understand that, history has been rewritten and diluted, right, throughout history. And so when you're not willing to open your eyes to what's right in front of you. But again, you have to understand, like, our country was built, the systems going all the way back to the Constitution. When you think about the people who were in the room signing that document, there was one demographic that was a white, straight Christian man. We have not heard about a person with a disability in the room. We don't know if there was someone who was openly LGBTQ. I mean, I know they weren't TQ because at the time there was not those, but no one who was a gay man. There were no women in the room. If a person was Black or a tribal native, right, they probably were slaves. And so the vantage point is just from a white Christian straight male. So the entire system is curved to benefit one racial or gender of people. And so the intentional ignorance is because if I am benefiting from what is out here, why should I look at things different? And so it's kind of like I'm not uncomfortable yet. So why should I think about a person with a disability until someone is diagnosed maybe with diabetes or some non-visible disability, or you have a physical disability? It's not until then that you begin to think about what's not available for you. So for me, it's having those conversations, meeting people. You have to find someone you trust to ask questions, but you can't be blinded by just what you see, because what you see is probably skewed based on whether you are in a privileged category or if, and that could be not just race, but it could be socioeconomic status. If a lot of people that I know, my husband is an entrepreneur. And so a lot of people in his circle say, well, this new administration, a lot of the policies are going to benefit us. You know what I'm thinking? Well, it might, right? But what about those, the least of these, those others, and how the ripple effect can be negative across the board?
And I've heard that from some folks as well, talking about the business aspect of what's happening in the current administration. And I'm also seeing that there's a bit of an alignment with the whole not caring about your neighbor. That seems to be going out of style. We see examples of it from the top. What do you say needs to happen other than an experience within that person's life or someone that they actually care about? What do you think needs to happen to get people to shift to really have an inclusive mindset, to see things from another perspective, even if it has not touched them?
If whoever can come up with that answer is going to be a genius. So for me, there's a moral and ethical compass, right, that we need to think about, but everybody doesn't have the same destination. I would say if someone is a believer, if you are Christian or even Muslim, there are certain things that these religious groups talk about of caring for your neighbor. If you're a believer in Christ, then everything that Jesus Christ was built on was about the least of these, the women, right? Those who were children, those who were, the woman who was about to, found in adultery. And he said, who has the first stone? No sin, cast the first stone. So when you think about that, Jesus's very presence was a protest because he did everything opposite, right? Mm-hmm. So when you think about it, you would want to, if someone is a religious believer in whatever their religion is, it could help them say, hey, what is our moral responsibility to those who have the least of it? But for those who don't, it's the government's responsibility to enlighten. And I believe that's why it's been so great in education, the academic freedom, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're able to teach those things and allow people to have an analytical way, a logical way of thinking, and come up with their own conclusions, right? But the government can't be completely responsible, but we have to think about each other. I mean, we are a human society, and it's just a human thing to do. I really don't have the answer for that because my heart is compassionate. So I'm always thinking of the next person, but everybody doesn't think that way because if it's, again, curved towards their benefit, then why should I change it? And it really kind of takes experiences or getting to know people that's not necessarily in your circle and learning about their experiences. And that could be the way to do it as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And as you were talking about the Christian faith, we see how that's being twisted around depending on where you sit on that side of the street. If you're really following Christ, you're not believing half of what's going on right now. And you see that is the opposite of what's going on. I want to talk a little bit about what the work in DEIA looks like now when it has been demonized, when it has been rolled back so fiercely, when it has almost been outlawed. What does this look like now? So
I touch on this in the book. I know, again, there have been so many different names for this work. So I see it as, first of all, it is a rebranding. Okay. A lot of corporations and companies, some of my colleagues, are working in the private sector right now. And I know for sure, and I don't go in and say all the details because I don't want people to go and attack, right? But it's a rebranding. It's a rebranding of what's happening. Some corporations, yes, they are pulling back. They're not holding on to their promises. But then there are others who are just simply rebranding. They're removing the outward, diversity statements. Again, everybody jumped on the bandwagon in 2020 after George Floyd. And so everybody wanted to be the loudest and say, I'm leading the way. So now it's a little bit more stealth mode, it's quieter. But I know that the work is still going on because so many people believe in this work and they see the return of the investment in equity work and the understanding of why it's important. And so these companies, and then again, this is not being promoted a lot in the media, but if you actually follow the work, you will see a lot of boards are voting against removing DEI from their corporations and their organizations. And so they're trying to say, we're going to do an anti-DEIA policy. And these boards are saying, absolutely not, because folks have learned and they see the quality of workers. They see the quality of work, the programming that goes out into the community and how it's been positively impactful. And so it's a rebranding. It's a deciding, let's do this a different way. And let's not maybe be so visible about it. Therefore, I know that the work still goes on. And so I just hope that maybe more than I even know about, more companies are still doing this work, even if they're not listing it or speaking out loud or announcing all of the programs that they're doing. I know that it will continue. It has to continue. And, me personally, I'm more of a fighter. Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Do it, right?
Let's knuckle up.
But I also understand the, why it's necessary at times to just kind of choose your battles because you want to win the war. So I understand that. And for me, the most important thing is make sure that this work continues. I don't care what you call it, but let's make sure that we do the work, bake it in. And then there is a power transition that needs to happen. We need to make sure that people have the authority to make these meaningful and data-driven decisions.
Absolutely. Dr. Alaysia Black Hackett, thank you so much for joining us on the Midday Break Room today. Thank you for this work. The Diversity Illusion, Why the Obsession with Looking Diverse is Failing and What They Don't Want You to Know. Tell people where they can pick up the book today.
Absolutely. You can find the book on Amazon. Just research the name and the name of the book, the title of the book, and then my name. You can also go to the website Diversity Illusion. That's ILLUSION.com. You can also order there, and there you will also find my website. Alaysia Black Hackett, ALAYSIA. The color black, it is my maiden name, and Hackett, HACKETT.com. And you can also find me on all social media platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I would love to connect with individuals. And I also say my husband is born and raised in Philadelphia, Northwest Philly, Allegheny, and Lehigh.
Okay.
Yes, all his family is there. Matter of fact, he's kin to some Bacons.
Get out of okay. We might be cousins. Hello. We might be cousins.
Yes, absolutely. So he's from Philly. So I was so happy to see that I was able to do this interview today with a Philadelphia radio station.
Fantastic. And we appreciate you and all the work that you do. Thank you so much, Dr. Hackett. We appreciate it. And we want folks to pick up the book today. All right.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
All right. You do the same. You're tuned in to The Week on Word. I'm Tiffany Bacon, and I'm the host of the Midday Break Room, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. on WURD. Join me for community-conscious, soul-satisfying, information-infused conversations with a pinch of joy and nostalgia. The Midday Mix at 12 noon gives you 20 minutes of music to rejuvenate your spirit. Join me, Tiffany Bacon, for the Midday Break Room, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. until 1 p.m., only on WURD. Progressive Black Talk Media. You're listening to the Week on Word podcast. To learn more about our programming, visit WURDradio.com. Our last conversation for this episode features Dr. David Johns, Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition and host of the Teach the Babies podcast, speaking with Dr. James Peterson.
I am super excited and honored to welcome to this program Dr. David Johns, the CEO and Executive Director of the National Black Justice Collective, also host of the podcast, must listen to podcast, Teach the Babies. Dr. David Johns, welcome to Evening Words.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for the grace also, brother.
Brother, thank you so much for taking time out of your insane schedule to come on to our little program. I really, really appreciate it. Dr. Johns, we just went through a headline here, local headline about an acute teacher shortage that is actually statewide. I've been reporting on the teacher shortage in Philadelphia, short some hundreds, if not a couple thousand teachers on any given year. And I've been so focused on Philadelphia, I didn't realize that it's actually a statewide shortage, which makes it more competitive and more difficult for Philadelphia to close that gap here. I wonder, given your work and your expertise, two things here. One, how do we make this profession more compelling and more attractive to people, period, but more specifically for Black men? Obviously, if there's a statewide general teacher shortage, you can imagine what that means in terms of representation of Black men in our public school classrooms. How do we solve for and crack this what seems like a fairly intractable problem at this point?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And before I answer, I want people to know a part of how I'm going to respond is informed by the fact that I was actually an elementary school educator. I taught kindergarten and third grade. I have a PhD in sociology and education policy. I served our country as President Obama's inaugural director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans.
Yes, sir.
So this is not just about my feelings. And so my answer, I have three answers. One is that we vote. We vote in every election. And we
why is voting important here? Why is voting important?
Why. Okay, because that's going to take me to my second one, which is I've read something on social media that stuck with me. And essentially it was an educator that posted an ad that said ICE is now paying, this immigration enforcement, is now paying people $100,000 a starting salary with a $40,000 bonus. And the person that posted this said, I'm an educator and I make $70,000 a year. And the connection between the two for me is what I know and what the research shows, including research done by folks like Dr. Ivory Tolson, is that those of us who accept a calling on our life as educators do not do it for the money. And in a capitalist society, it's important for us to be able to not just survive, but to thrive. And too often, frequently during presidential election cycles, people running for office will talk about the importance of education because they know it is something that motivates voters. They will talk about sometimes the importance of paying teachers more, especially if they are in progressive read major metropolitan areas where there are often unions who are investing in elections or otherwise turning out people to show up and support by way of knocking on doors or supporting campaigns. But that energy is seldom carried through at the point in time in which educators are actually receiving the benefits that they deserve and earn for doing the job of raising all of us regardless of our chosen profession. And so those are two things, which is we need to vote in every election and we need to make policy decisions that are aligned with the values that we often proclaim when talking about the importance of supporting the learning and development of our babies. So maybe that's 1.5. The next thing, the last thing would be that I just want to celebrate that there are individuals and organizations who've been working to solve these related crises for quite some time, specifically the Black male teacher shortage, the lack of teacher pay, the challenges with regard to the pipeline for those of us who come into the profession and should have opportunities to advance within it and or be retained in meaningful ways. But one brother who does some of this work based in Philadelphia is Sharif El-Mekki, who for the better part of a decade has hosted the Black male teacher convening in Pennsylvania, usually at that Lowe's Hotel right downtown.
That's right.
And it's a space where Black male educators and young brothers who are thinking about the profession and the Black women who hold us down, because Black men don't do anything without Black women and girls, gather in part to think through this, but really to ensure that there's a community to support brothers who often end up being alone doing this work. Just to end, when I taught elementary school in New York City, I was one of 3 Black men in the building, but I was the only classroom teacher. One of my colleagues led the art department, and another one of my colleagues taught PE. But I was the only Black male classroom teacher, which meant that I was not only a teacher, but I was an enforcer and a counselor and a parent whisperer,
a therapist, a parent,
but also a site for both my students and sometimes their nannies or caretakers or families to project their anxieties and insecurities onto my Black 6'5" body. So when like showing up in those spaces again, I taught kindergarten and 3rd grade, so my work also involved teaching white women, my colleagues, who felt really strongly about like we shouldn't touch kids. Look, if a child needs a hug or is asking for a hug or a hand on the shoulder is a sign of affirmation that allows them to get through a tough moment, I'm going to do the things that with consent and appropriate that are important for me to do that might read differently to you because you have a lens that's not informed by my intersectional experiences. But when engaging in that kind of battle with colleagues, in addition to doing the tough work of supporting the learning and development of 20 to 30 to 40 students, one needs to have a community to tell you that you're not crazy, that it's important for you to continue to show up and do the work in spite of the moments when it feels like you're running up against a wall. And so those are 2.5 to 3 responses to this seemingly intractable problem that can be solved if we vote more frequently and hold leaders accountable for investing in the things that they purport to care about, including our children and our schools.
Yeah, I mean, the paying ICE agents that much more than teachers is a value statement, and I think that's part of what I'm wrestling with here. Dr. Johns, you mentioned that for some it's a calling. I'm assuming for you it's a calling. Help us understand that, because if one of the pathways is to make sure that people feel called, that it's a vocational thing, capital V, from within our community. I'm curious as to how do we cultivate that? What put that calling on your heart?
What put the calling on my heart? That's something you got to take up with the ancestors. I grapple with that question frequently, and I think as a child, as a student, the version of the question that I grapple with was, if James Baldwin could have chosen to be anything other than responsible for being the scribe for our community and our country, would he have chosen, for example, to have been a self-serving attorney? And the reality is that we'll never know, because he accepted that the calling on his life was to do that which he did. And I similarly accepted that calling. And for me, it was a struggle. I graduated from Columbia University. I did 3 tours of duty. I grew up in Inglewood, California. I took an hour-long bus ride each way to and from school for most of my life. And I received messages that included, you got to leave the community that birthed you and conspired for you to be successful, to receive the skills, relationships, and experiences that will allow you to be quote unquote successful. Right? So I do all of that, graduate, top of my class, public school, go to Columbia. And the idea of graduating at the top of my class from an Ivy League university to become a public school teacher had my friends thinking that I was crazy. They literally had an intervention, invited me to a restaurant, quoted Lord of the Flies, A couple of them were going into
Not
finance.
Lord of the Flies. Oh my
Listen, I would never forget this. Shout out to Vernon and Angela. Quoted Lord of the Flies and going into finance. Their attitude was like, look, you want to, do good. We can give you the money to build a school. Right? Like, there are ways that you can do this. You don't have to sacrifice yourself in this way. But this was 2004. This was the height of Greta Gratz and Bollinger. This was pre-Obama. I spent a decade nearly in DC before Barack Hussein Obama ran for and became president. And most of my family could tell you what the hell I did. I wrote laws
Wow.
that were codified, right? Informing programs like Head Start or workforce development. I say all of this to say I don't have a direct answer other than the ancestors, and I accept that. I think that the way that we cultivate the calling in those who have been called to do this work, and I'll come back to the anchor around this for me, Asa Hilliard. Ways that we can cultivate it include ensuring, one, that we appreciate that education doesn't just happen in four walls in a place deemed a school. I started mine. I appreciate you acknowledging it. Teach the Babies podcast around the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, in part because of two reasons. One, I knew that case was a compromise. And if you talk to a lot of educators, they'll say that we are much more after that case than we were before.
We got to watch our language, Dr. Johns, because
That's a technical term. What do you mean?
Okay. All right. Got to be careful on there. We're live.
That's why I got this PhD, so I can speak multiple languages. But no, that's the technical term.
Okay.
Right. But that what they'll say is that the conditions of students and educators and families were materially better when Black educators were entrusted with the work of supporting the learning and development of Black babies. And I think that sometimes because of toxic stress, prolonged exposure to poverty, the things that come with having skin that's been kissed by the sun or dealing with anti-Blackness, we don't have the energy or skills to do the work of cultivating learning and development in third spaces or at home. But that's where it starts. A child's first and most important educator are their parents, and celebrating the process of learning, which is difficult by design. I used to tell my students all the time that the word education, the Latin root of the word is educare. It means to draw out. It's not easy if you're going to do it right. And so understanding that and cultivating that process and celebrating our traditions, African traditions of learning and sharing communally, not hoarding resources, but sharing them so that everybody can thrive, for me is first and foremost, and in response to how we do this work. And then the latter part of it for me is where I started, which is adults have to make more meaningful policy decisions to create conditions where those of us who can hear the calling will accept it, and or after accepting it will stay. This is why I find that so many talented educators, not just Black men, but those who love us, all of us and our beautiful diversity, leave the profession after entertaining the calling or heeding the calling. The last thing is this: I don't want folks to miss my words or the intention with which I'm offering them up. When I was in the White House, people would say silly things like teaching isn't rocket science. And my response is, yeah, you're right, it's a lot harder. And so my hope is that more of us are still enough and humble enough to ask whether or not we have a calling or an ability to teach. But know that if you are foolish enough to not be honest with yourself and asking those questions, the students will let you know whether or not it's a place that you should occupy.
Before we get on to some of your other work, first of all, I don't know how you do all the things that you do, Doc. I just don't know how you do it. But President Obama has been in the news over the last couple of days, and I don't want to pull you into the political muck, as it were, but there are two things I want you to reflect on here. One, which is I think relevant to our conversation, which is he appeared on Michelle Obama's podcast. I think this was last week, but clips have been circulating this week.
Podcast too.
And he spoke eloquently about a need for us to think of some more innovative ways to communicate with boys in terms of how we socialize them and rear them, as a way of thinking about the alienation of boys and young men in this nation, how that's a problem that maybe progressives have not addressed appropriately. I'd love for you to address that. That's the important piece. The not so important piece is that the MAGA folks have, based upon this trumped up thing, I think coming from DNI Tulsi Gabbard and a video that the president posted on social of former President Obama being arrested. I mean, they're trying to create some kind of their conspiracy thing around former President Obama, I think, as a distraction tactic. But because you've worked in this administration, I'm curious as to how you see those two stories around former President Obama that have bubbled up to the surface this past week.
Well, you'll have to help me. I'm not following. I tend to not consume the MAGA news when I don't have to. So what is Tulsi lying about now? What do they say? Who got arrested?
They so I love this. The absurdity of it is part of the thing, right? So I think they're saying there was some criminal, and I don't want to platform this either, Dr. Johns, but they're alleging that it is out there.
We got to talk about it too.
That is correct, right? And so they're alleging that there was criminal activity in the Russiagate investigation on the part of former President Obama, and right. So I just wonder if you have a comment on any of that. Again, given your work within this administration.
I wish that ignorant people didn't have public platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that broadly.
Mm-hmm.
I miss a cultural communal appreciation for journalism as a skill and a profession and a set of values that people express through their work and how they went about being journalists. And I'm saddened by the proliferation of disinformation and misinformation at a point in time in which not only is it the sad reality that we are not teaching the babies, as Bell Hooks would say, that democracies have to be defended by each generation and that education is its midwife. And that a part of that work includes critical thinking and media analysis, which so many people lack, which is why they can say whatever they want and have people believe it without doing any version of fact checking. That's one. And so, again, without more specifics about what they are alleging, which I know has no factual a basis connected to evidence, consistent with things that Tulsi's boss, the occupant, has said and demonstrated. It is what it is. And the effects of what they will say will have a material consequence for so many of us, and that both enrages and saddens me. Now, to the first part of the question around President Obama's comments around the importance of boys during their development having access to multiple manifestations of masculinity, which is what I heard. That's not what he said. I want to be clear about that.
I think it's a fair interpretation, Doc. I think that's a fair interpretation of where he's going with that. But go ahead.
I mean, yeah. Again, I want to be. I'm not making up or inserting. But that is what I heard. It is what I took away from that exchange between a man and his wife and his brother-in-law, as he reflects on all of the things. And so, what I am proud of is that that comment showed evolution. I remember Obama first term, the acolyte of Pastor Wright, who is a part of a lineage that my fiance loves, of preachers who preach, but preachers who also preach church hurt, a very white, anti-Black, anti-African version of a gospel. And President Obama was not first term a supporter of same-sex marriage or someone who I believe, based on his public values, would have said anything like what he said in public or in private. But I appreciate having witnessed him grow and be stretched and challenged, including by folks like Secretary Arne Duncan, who was, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, the first member of President Obama's senior leadership or cabinet to make a public statement in support of same-sex marriage or civil unions, at the time acknowledging that that was one of the priorities of the LGBTQ community, advocating for that right to be codified, which is now a right that we should expect to be contested by the MAGA-controlled Supreme Court. And so what I don't want to be lost in all of this is, to my point about how ignorance works. And when I mean that, I mean in the purest sense, people who lack information or understanding of a topic. And so often their response is informed by media. And in this context, often the way that media tells us to engage with folks who are queer or trans is through to laugh at them, to take advantage of them, or to operate in disgust. For folks who are confused by what I'm talking about, go back and watch Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. First, ask yourself if you can remember why he was took a plumber to his face at the end of the movie. And if you can't remember, go back and watch why, and what I'm saying will become clear. That's not the point. The point is that I celebrate men, cisgender and heterosexual men. For folks who don't know the words I just used, cisgender simply means that the gender that was assigned to you at birth by a doctor is consistent with the gender that you identify with at the point at which you're able to make that kind of a declaration. A heterosexual is straight, whatever that means to y'all. I celebrate when straight cisgender men, especially Black men, can talk about masculinity that is not the most damaging version of it that is usually projected upon us. I celebrate when Black men can talk about the importance of men being humans and having feelings. My hope is that we continue to evolve and appreciate that it is a fallacy that only queer men can and should be soft or acknowledge their emotions or have language to communicate how we're processing this thing called life. Those are things that I find often men, like in that moment, President Obama, are expressing a reverence for something they feel like they can't do because of the confines of masculinity and the way in which it's been coded for them. But my hope is that folks lean into that light and are learned from what can otherwise be a source of fear or anxiety or frustration without one doing the kind of work that is clear that the president is doing.
No, thank you for that. Doc, you won't believe it, but we are pretty much out of time here. But I can't let you go without letting folks know about the great work that you and others did to bring us the State of the People Power Tour. Can you give us a synopsis of that effort, why it's important, why it matters, and point folks to where they can access the Black papers to understand the great work that was done?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you to everyone, every member of your audience who has given me in this moment as your guest the gift of your time. I encourage everyone to visit stateofthepeople, PPL.com. our fine state of the people across digital platforms, everything except for Twitter, because since that petulant child broke it, we've been off that. But the State of the People movement is a love letter to the Black community, penned chiefly by Angela Rye and Joyanne Reed. This started during the occupants' first joint congressional address. It was 48 hours of counter programming to help people understand what he was lying about and what was at stake, including cuts to Medicaid that they foreshadowed but recently codified in this big billionaire boosting disasters bill, that they've even sunset provisions so that they don't come into effect until after the midterms, to go back to our initial points about voting. But that turned into a 10-city tour that launched in Atlanta, Georgia, concluded in Altadena, California, near Los Angeles, close to me. This was the weekend where the occupant ratcheted up and invested in ICE raids in California. But this was really a way for us to meet community, to celebrate folks like Sharif, who've always been trying to find ways to ensure that we thrive, including when government abdicates their responsibility, and to provide mutual aid to meet folks where they are after understanding their articulated needs. And I'm really proud that I got to lead a team of folks who contributed to the Black Paper Project. There are more than 34 policy papers on a range of topics. Thank you for authoring a Black paper connected to education, exactly where we started our conversation. But they're designed for folks who, as Brian Stevenson would say, understand the systems work exactly as designed, but don't have the time or resources to think about policy implications. So my hope is that you'll find papers that speak to you, that you can use as a resource to find organizations and individuals that can help you deepen and grow in your advocacy, and that you otherwise use them as a tool to help us all get closer to freedom. That's stateofthepeople.com.
You're listening to The Week on Word.
Hi, this is Dr. James Peterson, the host of Evening Words. Tune in to Evening Words Monday through Thursday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. for critical analysis of news, culture, and arts that resonate with our community. You won't want to miss our weekly segments of critical commentary with Cousin Chris, guests from the Center for American Progress, and dialogue with our local council members, plus other specialty segments full of education, entertainment, and engagement. Listen to Evening Words Monday through Thursday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. only on WURD, Progressive Black Talk Media.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Week on Word. Let's stay connected. Sign up for our newsletter and listen to us online at WURDradio.com and on the Word Radio app.